The suitcase was small, worn, and shouldn't have been there, but 11-year-old Caleb Williams clutched it against his chest like it contained everything he owned, which, in many ways, it did. Steve Harvey noticed it immediately during family introductions, that battered little case sitting at Caleb's feet, and something about it made his smile falter for just a moment. The Williams family from Denver stood at their podium. Robert and Linda Williams, both in their early 50s, their biological daughter, Sarah, 16, their adopted son, Marcus, 13, the picture of an all-American family, except for that suitcase and the way Caleb's eyes darted toward the exit every few minutes. "And who do we have here?" Steve asked, walking over to the family podium with his trademark warmth. He knelt down to Caleb's level, as he always did with younger contestants. "I'm Caleb," the boy replied, his voice steady but guarded. "Caleb Williams." "Caleb Williams. And how old are you, son?" 11 years old. Steve's eyes drifted to the suitcase again. "That's quite a bag you got there, Caleb. You planning on going somewhere after the show?" The studio audience chuckled, thinking it was just Steve being his usual charming self. But Caleb's expression didn't change. He looked directly at Steve with eyes that seemed far older than 11. "It's just in case," Caleb said simply. Linda Williams quickly stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Caleb's shoulder. "He's very organized," she said, with a laugh that sounded forced. "Always prepared for anything." Steve looked at Linda, then back at Caleb, and something in the boy's expression made him pause. There was a story here, a real one, hidden behind the family's game show enthusiasm. But this was television, and the cameras were rolling, so Steve smiled and moved on to introduce the rest of the family. The game began normally enough. The Williams family was competing against the Rodriguez family from Phoenix, and both teams were sharp, competitive, and full of energy. Steve was in his element, cracking jokes, making faces at unexpected answers, working the crowd with the ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times. But throughout the first 2 rounds, Steve found his attention drifting back to Caleb. The boy answered questions when called upon, but there was something mechanical about his responses, like he was following a script he'd memorized. And that suitcase never left his side. During the 3rd round, everything changed. The category was simple enough. Name something every family needs. Sarah, Caleb's sister, had just given the #1 answer: love and support. The family was celebrating, high-fiving, embracing each other in the way that made great television. Everyone except Caleb. Steve noticed it immediately. While his family celebrated around him, Caleb stood perfectly still, his hands gripping that suitcase handle so tightly his knuckles were white, and there was something in his expression, a kind of careful distance, like he was watching the celebration from behind glass. "Caleb," Steve called out, walking over to the family podium. "You feeling all right, son? Your family just knocked that one out of the park." Caleb looked up at Steve, and for a moment the careful mask slipped. "Yes, sir," he said. "They did good." It was the word choice that stopped Steve cold. Not "we did good," they did good. Like he was talking about people he knew but didn't quite belong to. Steve knelt down beside Caleb, the cameras capturing every moment. "Can I ask you something, son?" Caleb nodded. "How long have you been part of this family?" The studio fell quiet. The question seemed innocent enough, but something in Steve's tone suggested he was digging deeper. Caleb looked at the Williams family, then back at Steve. 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days, Caleb said without hesitation. The precision of the answer hit everyone in the studio, like a physical force. This wasn't a child talking about joining a family. This was a child who had been counting. Linda Williams stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Caleb has been with us since he was 9. We've been his foster family, and last year we started the adoption process." Steve stayed kneeling beside Caleb, his full attention focused on the boy. And before the Williams family, where were you? Caleb's grip on the suitcase tightened. Different places. How many different places? The boy was quiet for a long moment, counting in his head. 8, he said finally. 8 different houses since I was 6. The studio audience was completely silent now. Even the Rodriguez family, their competitors, had stopped celebrating their last answer and were watching this unfold with growing concern. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself in completely uncharted territory. This wasn't a game show moment anymore. This was a child's life being laid bare on national television. Caleb, Steve said softly, his voice stripped of all performance. Can you tell me about that suitcase? Caleb looked down at the worn case in his hands. It has my things in it. What kind of things? Important things. Pictures of my mom before she got sick, my favorite book, some clothes that actually fit me, and, he paused, looking uncertain for the first time. And what, son? And information about all the families I've lived with, phone numbers and addresses and stuff, in case I need to call someone or find my way back somewhere. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Steve Harvey, who had seen emotional moments and heartbreaking stories throughout his career, felt something break inside his chest. This wasn't just a foster child being cautious. This was a boy who had learned that families were temporary, that homes were just stops along the way, and that he needed to be ready to move at any moment. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Steve stood up slowly, walked to the center of the stage, and did something unprecedented. He stopped the game entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve announced, his voice carrying across the studio with unexpected gravity. We're going to take a moment here, because I just met someone who's teaching me something important about what family really means. He walked back to Caleb and knelt down again. Son, can I tell you something? Caleb nodded. I want you to look around this studio. See all these people? The audience, the crew, your family up there, even the Rodriguez family who's supposed to be competing against you. Caleb's eyes swept across the studio. Every single person in this room just learned something about courage from you. You know what courage is, Caleb? The boy shook his head. Courage is carrying that suitcase every day, being ready for whatever comes, but still choosing to hope, still choosing to let people love you, even when you're scared they might leave. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card. This has my personal phone number on it. Not my manager's, not my assistant's, mine. And I want you to put it in that suitcase with your other important things. He handed the card to Caleb, whose small hands trembled as he took it. But here's what I want you to understand, Caleb. That suitcase you've been carrying, it's full of your past. All those houses, all those families who didn't work out, all those times you had to pack up and move on. But standing right behind you is your future. Steve gestured to the Williams family, who were now openly crying at their podium. Those people don't see you as temporary. They don't see you as a foster child, or a placement, or a case number. They see you as their son, as permanent, as home. Robert Williams left the family podium and walked over to where Steve and Caleb were standing. Without saying a word, he knelt down and looked directly at his son. Caleb, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, I need you to know something. That suitcase, you don't need it anymore, because you're not going anywhere. Ever. This family is yours. This home is yours. We're yours. Linda Williams joined them, along with Sarah and Marcus. The entire Williams family formed a circle around Caleb, their arms reaching out to encompass him completely. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey reached down and gently took the suitcase from Caleb's hands. The boy's eyes went wide with panic. It's okay, Steve said softly. I'm not taking it away. I'm just going to show you something. Steve opened the suitcase in front of the entire studio. Inside were exactly what Caleb had described: a few small items of clothing, a worn children's book, some faded photographs, and a manila folder thick with paperwork. Steve pulled out the folder and held it up. "This," he said, "represents 8 different tries. 8 different families who, for whatever reason, couldn't give you what you needed. But you know what I see when I look at this?" He opened the folder and pulled out page after page of documents, placement forms, evaluation reports, caseworker notes. "I see a boy who never gave up, who kept trying, who kept believing that somewhere out there was a family that would choose him, not as a temporary fix, not as a good deed, but as a son." Steve set the papers aside and reached into the suitcase again. This time he pulled out the photographs, faded pictures of a young woman who looked like she could barely be out of her teens. "Is this your mom?" Steve asked gently. Caleb nodded, tears starting to stream down his face. "She's beautiful. And you know what? She's watching this right now, and she's proud. She's proud that her boy found a family. She's proud that he's brave enough to let them love him." Steve closed the suitcase and handed it back to Caleb. "You keep this, but from now on, it's not an escape plan. It's a reminder. A reminder of how far you've come, how strong you are, and how much this family fought to bring you home." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't the typical game show cheering. This was something deeper, something that connected every person in that room to their own experiences of family, of belonging, of finding home. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the Williams family directly. "Robert, Linda, I want you to know something. What you've done for this boy, taking him in, loving him, fighting to make him yours officially, that's not charity. That's family. And Caleb, he's not lucky to have you. You're lucky to have him." Steve reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out something that made the entire studio gasp. It was a manila envelope, thick with official documents. "I made some calls during the commercial break," Steve said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. "Called in some favors, talked to some people who know people. Caleb Williams, your adoption papers are final. As of right now, you are officially, legally, permanently a Williams." The studio exploded. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. The Rodriguez family abandoned their podium to join the celebration. Camera operators who had seen hundreds of tapings found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. Robert Williams swept Caleb into his arms, lifting him off the ground in a hug that seemed to encompass years waiting, hoping, and loving. Linda, Sarah, and Marcus wrapped their arms around both of them, creating a human shield of family love. And Steve Harvey, the man who had made America laugh for decades, stood watching this moment with tears streaming down his face, knowing that he had just witnessed something that transcended television, something that would change not just Caleb's life, but everyone who saw it. When the celebration finally died down, Caleb looked directly at Steve with eyes that were no longer guarded, no longer careful. "Mr. Steve," he said, his voice clear and strong, "can I tell you something? Anything, son. I don't need the suitcase anymore." Steve knelt down one more time, eye level with this remarkable boy who had just taught an entire studio what resilience looked like. "Why's that, Caleb?" Caleb looked at his family, his real family, his permanent family, and then back at Steve. "Because I'm home." The words hung in the air for a moment, perfect and complete. Then Steve did something he had never done in 15 years of hosting Family Feud. He stood up, walked the main camera, and spoke directly to the millions of viewers watching at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, we started this show thinking we were going to play a game. Instead, we just witnessed a miracle. Caleb Williams reminded us that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, it's about showing up, it's about love that doesn't give up, even when the road is long and hard. He turned back to the Williams family, still embracing in the center of the stage. And sometimes, the greatest victories don't happen on a game show. They happen when a boy realizes he doesn't need to carry a suitcase anymore because he's finally truly home. The episode, when it aired 6 months later, became the most watched Family Feud in the show's history. Not because of the game itself, but because viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured: the power of love to transform, to heal, to create family where none existed before. Caleb Williams, now officially and permanently a Williams, still has that suitcase, but it sits in his bedroom closet, no longer packed with escape plans and emergency contacts. Instead, it holds new memories, pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and report cards that his parents proudly displayed on the refrigerator. The business card Steve gave him that day is framed on his wall, but Caleb has never needed to call the number, because for the first time in his life, he has everything he needs right where he is. And every year on the anniversary of that episode, the Williams family watches it together, remembering the day that a game show became a courtroom, a television studio became a home, and a foster child became exactly what he had always been in their hearts: their son. Steve Harvey later said in interviews that Caleb's story changed how he approached every episode. "I realized that day that every person who steps onto that stage is carrying something," he explained. "My job isn't just to host a game, it's to see them, really see them, and sometimes that means stopping everything to honor their truth." The suitcase moment became legendary among Family Feud staff. New producers are shown that episode during training, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what television can be at its most powerful. Because sometimes the most important stories aren't scripted. They're lived, one brave moment at a time. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. In 15 years of hosting Family Feud, Steve had developed an instinct for reading people, for sensing the stories they carried beneath their game show smiles. And this boy, this quiet kid, with careful eyes, was carrying something heavy. It was a Thursday afternoon, taping at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The energy was electric, as always, two families ready to compete for the grand prize.